My name is Cindy Petrov Alfaro. I am a Latina woman, immigrant from El Salvador, the first in the history of Indiana University to graduate as a temporary protected status recipient. I have earned 13 awards in 8.5 years of higher education, one of which was the Elite 50 Award given to 50 graduate students out of 8,100 student professionals. I have held 16 different jobs while in school, 7 of which were legal professional positions, and 2 were fellowships. I am the CEO of my own company, and I'm on my way to being a part of the 2% of Latina attorneys in the US. My brother's an engineer, excuse me, and he works for a large international company. My mother graduated with her master's in social work. My father is an engineer, and each own their own small businesses. Sorry, guys, I am not comfortable talking about my accomplishments, let alone in the public format. And in fact, this whole time, my stomach has felt queasy and nauseous. Why? Because I think stories like these are a disservice to our community. Did you feel empowered at all while I told you my accomplishments? I didn't. I didn't feel a connection to you. I don't agree with sharing one-dimensional stories like these because they are a disservice to our community, especially our brown and black youth. One-dimensional stories in this format, these success stories, only show a very small view of what it takes to reach these achievements. Many of you have heard the term success story. We see them often on social media pages where friends, families, and colleagues share their most recent achievements, from graduating university to obtaining a license to earning awards and more. But what you really need to know about me is that I was an immigrant child. You probably donated a toy to at Christmas time. Or I was the immigrant child who needed her first winter coat, excuse me, which was donated to the Salvation Army. Or I was a member of that low-income household you donated a food pantry item to during the holidays. I didn't see people that looked like me who were in positions of power or privilege, let alone anyone with a successful career. If I ever met anyone with a successful career, they either did not look like me or they were a fictional character in a movie. The first time I met an attorney and I looked at his company profile page online, I read like an ivory tower that seemed unreachable. Their long list of achievements only showed a very small view of what it meant to become successful. Perhaps the social constructs of my life are different because of my ethnicity, my culture, or my low income class, but it was difficult to ever imagine myself as anything else. Although my parents gave me every opportunity and encouraged me to earn my degrees, it does take a village to raise each other. It's not until we accept our humanness, our raw stories, that we can build a bridge into the future. So, I was born in El Salvador, which is in Latin America. My mother and father survived the Civil War in the late 1980s, and I was born right at the end of the war. My mother worked herself out from poverty to become a military nurse, and my father put himself through school to become an engineer. We had earned a spot as a middle-class family with the biggest house in the block in 1999. When my father was laid off by his company, he established a small market on the lower level of our 3-story home. Gangs had invaded our home in the 1980s, and they quickly began targeting our small food market. They began to steal from and threaten my parents. And as a 9-year-old child, I saw my father on his knees with a gun to his head, begging for his life. And after that attack, my father saw a visa to the US, hoping that when we returned to El Salvador, the gangs would have forgotten about us. To get a visa, it was a miracle. Today, it's nearly impossible to get a visa. To get a visa, you have to demonstrate financial wealth and stability, while also paying steep application fees. My grandmother had attempted to get a visa 6 times before and had been denied. When my mother applied for a visa in 1993, she demonstrated extensive documentation of her income and stability. By a miracle, my father, my brother, and me were granted visas. And on October 2nd, 1999, we said our goodbyes to our family members, and we tearfully walked into the airport. We didn't know that we would never return. Our country was hit by a devastating set of earthquakes, and my parents were faced with the difficult decision to overstay our visas because of the difficulties, the extreme difficulties we will face if we returned. My family never imagined living in the US, but this is our home. As an immigrant in southern Indiana, I did grow up with privileges other children like me did not. I didn't have to cross the border, and I flew into the US with a visa. In 2001, the US president provided us with a humanitarian legal relief to work and study legally in the US. And I also attended private school most of my life. I had the financial support of my parents most of my life. However, we faced racism, hate crimes committed against us, financial struggles, and people questioning our legal status. In the winter of 1999, when my father tried to enroll us in school, his limited English prevented him from enrolling us in their proper school grade. And I was held back a year. That was step 1 to being different. I was a tall kid, believe it or not, looking different, being taller, and not speaking English were some of the struggles I would face that first year. During that time, I didn't understand much of anything. But my brother and I were the first Latin American children in the history of the school. Although we faced a lot of difficulties, we did have community members that did raise us up. However, the majority of the people around me marginalized my family and me through small actions. And many people didn't know the struggles I faced growing up from a young age into adulthood. Once we arrived in the US, the majority of people did not know that my parents had to work 2 jobs each to make ends meet. I barely got to see my parents. I got Fs as grades because I didn't have the support of an English-speaking parent. And the first time I got a C was because of a teacher named Mrs. Hoffman. She was a catalyst to my education, and that's when I learned that I could believe in myself too. And most people do not know that my father put himself through school in El Salvador to become an engineer, but coming to the US, his education meant nothing. He was an income provider for our family while we were in school. In his wrinkled hands, stained with oil and paint, tell stories of working 12 to 18 hours a day to make sure that he created his small business and that we had enough. Most people do not know that my mother suffered a severe accident that left her with 6 herniated discs, and she was not able to walk for 3 years. So I was faced to run our household at the tender age of 13 years old, and I was responsible for feeding and bathing her and also taking care of my younger brother. Many of you have your own struggles, and life was really difficult. By adding in my legal status complicated great aspects of my life. When schools began giving me their acceptance letters, many of them questioned my legal status. So they began to taking away their scholarship offers. My family had to work multiple jobs to make sure that we paid our tuition because we were not able to receive federal loans, private loans, or any federal aid. My parents went from having enough sometimes to counting cents to pay the electric bill, or that I had to go through the food pantries. But I never told my parents because I didn't want to worry them. We believed in education so much because it can take everything from you, but never your education. As a brown immigrant woman, life was very difficult, and I did have community members that uplift me, but those that marginalized my family came in actions such as Americans yelling at us because they didn't want to understand our accent, and as we struggled to find an apartment or pay our electric bill, or when my high school counselor told me that I will never, people like me will never get into higher education. Or the moment I remember the most was when my English teacher told me, my high school English teacher told me that I will never get anywhere with my writing. Telling you my one-sided look at my success story only shows a very small view of what it all took to come here, to get where I am today. And I want to talk about that with you. I want to tell you today that your struggle story, when you open up and create a culture that you're able to talk to somebody else, a stranger, despite being scared, because believe me, I am scared to be here today. I'm terrified of being here today. But when you are opening up, talking to somebody, even if it's radical, that is why you're brave. And let me say that again. Being vulnerable is for the brave. It's time for our community to open up and show more of who we are. It's already difficult to live in this world. But if you don't share your thoughts and ideas, we already know that we have an ending in this world. And you will have an ending in this world. Your thoughts and ideas, they will fade away. And you will fade away into an eternity. So, because of my struggles I faced, I started sharing some of those struggles online. And then soon, within the 3 weeks, I started getting thousands of messages, followers, likes, and comments from students just like me who needed to hear these stories. I had tearful messages from students who felt that my story resonated with theirs and that they too felt alone. And all this time I felt alone. I thought my story was shameful and unworthy, powerless way of life. But one day I felt different. Something inside me, through my personal prayer, said that my story was not a story of shame, and it was a story of thriving, success, and empowerment. When I shared those stories with those students, I didn't know someone from California to New York to in Minnesota needed to hear these stories. And now they have concrete role models who they're able to connect that look just like them, and they're able to hear these stories and how they created their dreams and how they came alive. And I want to share that with you today, that you will be able to change your community when you take your story of brokenness and you piece that together to pray for someone else to follow that path. I'm a believer that when you are able to embrace this form of learning, you're able to create innovative ways to rise above your circumstances. So the last thing I would like to leave with you while I was preparing this talk, in 2015, I had recently lost my grandfather, and I got my first semester grades from law school. I was failing law school, and I was on academic probation. So I met with a partner from Barnes & Thornburg, one of the most prestigious law firms in the nation. This mentor is an African man who makes hundreds of dollars per hour. He told me how he had a 1.5 GPA when his first semester of law school. He gave me words of wisdom and said how my success story was not going to be overnight, and nor was his. He walked me through his mended wings and every single way he failed before he learned how to fly. So tonight, I want to challenge you to share your your struggle story. Find the empowerment in your brokenness and share that with a youth in your life. I challenge you to mentor a youth in your life. I am brave. I am strong. I am resilient. I am Cindy, Petrov, Alfaro, and I'm a human. Who are you? Thank you.